Display panel. The MacBook screen is basically a grid of tiny pixels that light up in different colors to create what you see. Modern MacBooks use either liquid retina displays or mini LED backlighting, which means thousands of individual LEDs behind the screen control brightness in specific zones instead of lighting everything evenly. These displays push resolutions up to 3024 by 1964 pixels and can hit around 500 to 1600 nits of brightness depending on the model. Apple Silicon chip. Apple's M series chips put the CPU, GPU, and neural engine all on one piece of silicon instead of spreading them across separate components. This means data doesn't have to travel far between parts, which saves energy and makes everything faster. The neural engine handles machine learning tasks like photo recognition, while the CPU and GPU split traditional computing work. Because everything shares the same unified memory pool, the system can move information around without copying it between different chips. Unified memory. Unified memory is Apple's approach where the CPU and graphics processor share the same pool of RAM, instead of keeping them separate like traditional computers do. In older systems, data often had to be copied from CPU memory to GPU memory and back again, wasting time and energy. With unified memory, both processors access the exact same data instantly without duplicating it. This makes everything from video editing to gaming faster because nothing waits around for copies to finish. SSD storage. Your MacBook's SSD is basically a grid of memory cells that trap electrons to store data as ones and zeros. No spinning parts, just chips soldered directly onto the logic board, which makes it insanely fast but impossible to upgrade later. Apple does this partly for speed and partly so you can't just pop in a bigger drive yourself. Read speeds hit around 3,000 megabytes per second on newer models. Logic board. The logic board is the main circuit board inside a MacBook, and it's basically the nervous system of the whole machine. Every major component plugs into it. The processor, memory, storage, ports, everything. It routes electrical signals and data between all these parts so they can actually communicate with each other. Without it, you just have a bunch of separate components sitting in a metal case doing nothing. Battery. The MacBook's lithium polymer battery is rated in watt-hours, which tells you how much energy it holds. Apple designs these batteries to retain about 80% of their original capacity after 500 full charge cycles, where one cycle means draining and recharging the entire battery. To stretch battery life, macOS throttles background processes, dims the display automatically, and manages which apps can run when you're unplugged. Keyboard mechanism. Apple's Butterfly keyboard, used from 2015 to 2019, had almost no key travel and failed constantly from dust. The key sat on a thin metal dome that collapsed when pressed, giving barely a millimeter of movement. They switched back to scissor switches in the Magic Keyboard, which uses two plastic pieces that cross like scissors under each key, giving more travel and way better stability. Trackpad. Apple's Force Touch trackpad doesn't actually click. Instead, pressure sensors detect how hard you press, and a taptic engine, basically a linear actuator, vibrates in a way that perfectly mimics the feeling of a mechanical click. The whole surface acts as one giant button, and the system recognizes multi-finger gestures like pinching, swiping, or force clicking for deeper menus. It's a convincing illusion that most people never realize isn't real. Touch bar, legacy. Apple replaced the function keys on some MacBook Pros with a thin OLED strip that changed based on what app you were using. It showed different buttons for different tasks like playback controls in music apps or formatting options in word processors. The idea was contextual buttons would be more useful than static keys, but most people found it gimmicky and missed the physical function keys, so Apple quietly brought them back in 2021. Thermal system. The M series chips produce heat that needs to escape, so Apple uses a thin layer of thermal paste between the processor and a metal heatsink that spreads that warmth out. From there, Heat travels through a vapor chamber or copper pipes to a larger aluminum sink. A single fan pulls air across those fins and pushes it out the back vents. The system monitors chip temperature constantly and spins the fan faster when things heat up. Speakers. MacBooks pack 6 speakers into that thin chassis arranged in a force-canceling setup that keeps the whole machine from vibrating off your desk. You get 2 woofers firing down to handle bass and 4 tweeters positioned at the edges for high frequencies and stereo width. The spatial audio trick is simple geometry, speakers spread far apart, and software that adjusts sound based on where your head is, tracked by the camera. Microphones. The 3 microphone setup uses beam-forming technology to lock onto your voice while filtering out background noise. One mic picks up sound from the front, while the other 2 capture audio from different angles. The phone compares all 3 signals in real time and figures out which sounds are coming from your mouth versus the environment around you. This lets it isolate your voice and suppress everything else during calls and recordings. Camera. The FaceTime camera sits in the top bezel and uses a small image sensor that captures light through a fixed lens. This sensor converts photons into electrical signals that become your video feed. The neural engine steps in immediately, analyzing each frame to adjust exposure, reduce noise, and keep faces sharp even in dim light. All of this happens in real time before the image ever reaches your screen or travels across the internet. Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. Your phone talks to the internet and other devices through tiny radio transmitters built into specialized chips. Wi-Fi 6E uses the 6 GHz frequency band to push speeds over a gigabit per second, while Bluetooth 5.3 handles short-range connections to headphones and watches using way less power. The antennas are microscopic strips of metal etched onto the circuit board, and they're shaped precisely to broadcast and receive at specific frequencies. Thunderbolt ports. Thunderbolt ports look identical to regular USB-C, but pack way more power under the hood. One cable can charge your laptop, transfer files at 40 gigabits per second, push video to 2 4K displays, and run external drives or docks all at once. The trick is the Thunderbolt protocol running through that same USB-C shape, which dedicates separate data lanes for each task simultaneously instead of making them share bandwidth. MagSafe connector. Apple brought back the MagSafe connector in 2021 after ditching it for USB-C years earlier. The port uses an array of small magnets arranged around the charging pins that snap the connector into place when you bring it close to the laptop. If someone trips over your cable or yanks it, the magnets are strong enough to hold during normal use but weak enough to let go before your laptop gets dragged off the table. T2 or Secure Enclave. The T2 chip is Apple's custom security processor that lives separate from your main CPU. It handles encryption keys, verifies your operating system hasn't been tampered with during startup, and processes your fingerprint data from Touch ID without ever sending it to the main system. Think of it as a dedicated bouncer that checks IDs and guards the door while your computer does everything else. Even if malware infected your MacBook, it couldn't access the secure enclave inside the T2. Touch ID sensor. The fingerprint scanner in your power button uses capacitive sensing. When you press it, tiny electrical sensors create a detailed map of your fingerprint's ridges and valleys. This data gets converted into a mathematical representation and stored in the secure enclave, a separate chip that's isolated from the rest of the system. Your actual fingerprint image never leaves that chip and can't be accessed by apps or even the main processor. Aluminum unibody. When Apple shifted to machining laptop bodies from a single block of aluminum instead of assembling multiple parts, they solved several problems at once. The unibody design made the chassis way more rigid because there weren't weak points where pieces joined together. The metal itself became a giant heat sink, spreading warmth from the processes across the entire frame. This approach also let them shave off thickness since the structure didn't need reinforcement brackets or extra layers. Hinge mechanism. The hinge on a laptop is basically a controlled friction point. Inside, you've got metal barrels with springs and washers that create just enough resistance to hold the screen at whatever angle you open it to. The tricky part is routing the display cable through this moving joint without pinching or wearing it out. Manufacturers cycle test these thousands of times, opening and closing repeatedly until something fails.